Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Sports Lock Podcast. I'm your host, Ben Mostaller, and today we have the AFC South Fantasy Football Preview. If you missed out on last week's episode, we started our divisional previews, and last week was the AFC North. Today is the South, and we'll move on from there for the rest of the time being. Once we get through the divisional previews, I will have my rankings for you before right around the preseason ends. That way you'll be able to draft and be confident in who you're picking. So if you enjoy this, I do all the work for you. All you have to do is tune in, listen, and win your league. So make sure that you follow and subscribe to the channel at Sports Talk Podcast on TikTok, on YouTube, on Instagram, and on Twitter for all your fantasy football needs. So like I said, today we were focusing on the AFC South, and we're going to start with the Houston Texans, who finished last in the division and had their worst record since 2013, going 3-13-1. So what did they do this offseason? They went out and signed Dalton Schultz from Dallas to a one-year, $9 million deal. They also grabbed Devin Singletary, the running back from the Bills the last few seasons, for a one-year, $3.75 million deal. They got Robert Woods from Tennessee, a two-year, $15.25 million deal, a great deal for that wide receiver there. And they got quarterback Case Keenum from Buffalo, who started his time in Houston. He's back there on a two-year, $6.25 million deal. In the draft, though, they went and got the quarterback they wanted with the second pick overall, and they got C.J. Stroud out of Ohio State, who was a Heisman finalist his last two seasons at Ohio State, and as a two-year starter, racked up over 8,000 yards, 85 touchdowns, and only 12 interceptions. They then had the third pick as well, and they went with Will Anderson Jr., the edge rush from Alabama, two-time All-American SEC Defensive Player of the Year. So big moves for the Houston Texans this past offseason. We'll see how they do this year, primarily for fantasy football and starting with C.J. Stroud. Now, I told you his stats in college, but we don't know yet how he's going to perform. I hate to draft rookie QBs in any sort of fantasy league, at least not until I see the preseason. Even after that, I'm still iffy with that. But CJ Stroud, I would wait until the preseason's over with. Right now, I'd have him outside the top 20. ESPN has him at QB 26. That's where I'm putting him as well for now. The running back's Dameon Pierce, who finished running back 24 in his rookie year, 939 yards and 4 touchdowns. If he played the whole season, Pierce would have easily finished over 1,000 yards, but lacked touchdowns. Even if reaching that mark, he really wouldn't have finished that much higher. He would have been running back 21. Now, they do add Devin Singletary. How much are they going to use Singletary, and how much will Stroud run the ball? I think that could impact Dameon Pierce this season. I think he will split some time with Singletary. That's why I'm having him finish RB24 like he did last year, whereas ESPN has him a lot higher at running back 17, thinking that Singletary and Stroud won't have an impact, where I think that, they will, which will hurt Dameon Pierce's numbers. The main wide receiver for their team is Robert Woods, and he's going into his 11th season. So they don't have much depth outside of him. Nico Collins, John Mechie III. Woods finished wide receiver 58 with 53 receptions, 527 yards, and 2 touchdowns. And it's arguably the worst passing team in the NFL last season in the Tennessee Titans. I think he does improve from last season, even with Stroud as a rookie quarterback, but still, I don't think it'll be amazing. I think he'll be right around wide receiver 45, even if he does step out as the top wide receiver. ESPN has him way down at wide receiver 66, with Nico Collins going ahead of him and John Mechie only going 3 behind him. So I think he does a little bit better. He's the vet on the team, but I think some guy might pop up. So I am just staying away from Houston wide receivers. Now, the tight end, like I said, is Dalton Schultz, coming in from Dallas last season, finished tight end 10, 57 receptions, 577 yards, and 5 touchdowns. But there is a downgraded quarterback. You're going from Dak Prescott to now C.J. Stroud. So I think obviously he's very talented, but I don't think he'll be as high as tight end 10. I'm putting him at tight end 13, ESPN tight end 11. Now their defense isn't bad. It's good. They made some good improvements in the draft, so it's not going to be terrible. But I think the pros are that they did attack some great positions in the draft to try to improve this team. But some cons are that they're a new young team with little experience. So I think that really hurts them. Last year they were 3-13-1. I projected 2-15, so not far off there. This year, I think they improve one game better. They go to 4-13. I think that's where I'd feel comfortable putting them. Now to the Indianapolis Colts, who finished third in the division. They had a 4-12-1 record, which was the second worst record for the Colts since 2011. So a terrible year for them. This offseason, they went out and got wide receiver Isaiah McKenzie from Buffalo on a one-year deal, and they got quarterback Gardner Minshew from Philadelphia on a one-year, $3.5 million deal. Now, the big draft acquisition was the 4th overall pick. They went quarterback Anthony Richardson out of Florida. He had 2,549 yards last year and 17 touchdowns. Now, last year, if he would have had that stat line that he did in college, he would have finished around quarterback 20. And what doesn't make any sense to me is that ESPN lists him at quarterback 17. So I really don't understand why they think he's going to improve. A lot of people are higher on him than I am. I have him quarterback 25, and it's not even posted yet that he's going to be the starter. He's going to have to fight time with Gardner Minshew. And I think that could cause some issues, unlike CJ Stroud, where he's the main guy. So I do have him right down there at quarterback 25. For me, I think he's got a much better team around him and the wide receiver running back core and a great offensive line. So I think he does do better than Stroud, but I don't think he'll be as high as quarterback 17. I'm putting him at quarterback 25. Now, the running back is Jonathan Taylor, of course, coming off a career year in 2021. Taylor only played in 11 games last season, finishing running back 30. But if he was healthy, he was on pace to finish with over 1,300 yards and 6 touchdowns, which have made him running back 11. Now, assuming that he's healthy, we know the guy can really go off, and he can easily increase his touchdowns to anywhere to 8 to 10 touchdowns a game. So I like him as my running back 6. ESPN has him as RB4. I like a couple guys just ahead of him. But ultimately, I think running back 5, running back 6 is a solid spot to put Jonathan Taylor. And again, I'm putting this here based off of what I'm seeing now. Come preseason, come any more news, I'll have my final rankings for you in a podcast about the week before the football season starts, right? That's about Labor Day. Preseason ends. You have about a little bit of a break. That's when I normally draft, Labor Day weekend. And that's when I'll have my official rankings. But for now, I would take him about running back 6. Wide receiver is Michael Pittman Jr. He's the main guy. He finished last year as wide receiver 20 with 99 receptions, which ranked 8th amongst wide receivers, 925 yards and 4 touchdowns. I don't see the receptions going down with Richardson, or I would say really going up. I think the yards and touchdowns, I do see the receptions going down. So with that being said, I think he drops to wide receiver 26. ESPN has a wide receiver 32. Really doesn't make sense to me. Again, if they are so high on Anthony Richardson, why are they saying that Pittman is going to underperform? I don't know. I'd take him as my wide receiver 26. And other guys on the team, Alec Pierce, Josh Downs, are their wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3. With a rookie quarterback, I'd stay away from those two. And the tight end is Jelani Woods, who finished tight end 34 in his rookie season, only 25 receptions, 312 yards, and 3 touchdowns. The one thing I don't like about the Colts is that they use multiple tight ends, so I don't really see his stats improving much. I have him the whole way down as tight end 32, where ESPN has him much higher than that at tight end 21. But I just don't see too much improvement, although there should be a little bit of improvement. I see him somewhere around tight end 30, maybe the higher 20s, but I'm comfortable taking him as my tight end 32. Their defense is good as well. The pros are that they have Taylor and Pittman Jr. two amazing athletes on their team on that offense. But the cons are that they drafted a new young quarterback. And even if it's Minshew, I think there's going to be some issues there. So I think that's going to cause some trouble on the offensive end. Now, last year they went 4-12-1. I projected 9-8, so pretty far off there. However, this year I do think they improve 2 games better to 6-11. And so I have them finishing second in the division. The team that could be the team to watch this season is the Jacksonville Jaguars. Last year, they won the division at 9-8, which was their best record since 2017 and only their second division title since 1999. Now, they really didn't have any big offseason moves, but they did draft Anton Harrison, an offensive tackle from Oklahoma, who only allowed 1 pressure and sack last year. And then they went with my guy from Penn State in the second round with the 61st overall pick, Brenton Strange from Penn State, who I believe will be a fantastic backup to Evan Engram. Now, I have to give a lot of props to Trevor Lawrence last year. He made a huge jump from QB 18 in his rookie year to QB 7 in his sophomore year. Lawrence finished with 4,113 yards, which was 8th best amongst quarterbacks, 25 touchdowns, which was 6th best, and only 8 interceptions. He also added 5 rushing touchdowns, which was tied for 4th amongst quarterbacks. Now, going from 17 touchdowns to 8 interceptions and adding 13 more touchdowns than his rookie year, Lawrence should continue to improve. I think he puts up numbers like he did last season, maybe, a touchdown more or less, maybe an interception more or less. But I think ultimately things stay the same. Besides, I think 5 rushing touchdowns is quite a lot. I think that'll be down to maybe 3 or 4. So with that being said, I have him as my QB 8, and for once, ESPN agrees with me. Running back Travis Etienne, who finished running back 16 in only 12 games, started, although he played in all 17, only starting in 12. Etienne still had over 1,000 rushing yards and 5 touchdowns, and for this season, he could easily get to 1,500 yards. But realistically, I think, if him only starting 5 games he didn't start, I think he gets closer to about 1,300 and about 8 touchdowns. And if you take those averages from last season, he would have finished running back 7. So when taking all that into consideration, I'm high on Travis Etienne. I think he is a big sleeper to finish in the top 5. I have him as my RB9, ESPN RB11. Now, the Jaguars have an amazing wide receiver core, and one awesome addition that they made is Calvin Ridley. We know how fantasy relevant he was in Atlanta until he got in trouble for sports betting. Now he's officially back. He tags along with Christian Kirk, who was a stud last year, finishing wide receiver 12 with 84 receptions, 1,108 yards, and 8 touchdowns, which was tied 4th. Now, I do think Ridley does tap into those numbers a little bit. And then they also have Zay Jones, who was wide receiver 26 last year. So, but taking that all into consideration, I have Kirk, my wide receiver 28. ESPN has him wide receiver 33. Ridley, wide receiver 30. ESPN has him higher than Kirk at wide receiver 27. Not saying that he can't, but we just haven't seen him play in 2 years. So how do we know how he's going to do? We already know that he has a connection with Christian Kirk. So how will Lawrence have that connection with Calvin Ridley? And finally, Zay Jones, late in drafts. I have him as my wide receiver 56, ESPN wide receiver 60. Tight ends Evan Engram, who finished tight end 5 with 73 receptions, 766 yards, and 4 touchdowns. Evan finished in the top 5 in fantasy for tight ends from weeks 13 to 16, including tight end 1 in week 14. He's just very hot at the end of the season, and I think that carries into this year. He even did well in the playoffs. I think Engram does see fewer receptions in 2023, but ultimately, I think you take a look at yards and touchdowns, and I think it'll be about the same. So I have him as my tight end 6, ESPN tight end 9. I think he's a solid pick. And again, we always talk about the 2 main guys in Kelsey and Andrews. And outside of that, you could add Kittle. But outside of that, who do you go after? And I think it's pretty a fair line from like tight ends 4 to 10. I think that any of them could finish, anywhere right at the top 5. So I don't think you're wrong in picking any of those guys. And Engram has a chance to be one of those guys once again. Now the defense, I would draft a very great defense that you want. The pros are that they're keeping the same core. They improved in the draft, and they really have an easy division this offseason. And for my cons, I put to be determined, because right now when I'm thinking about the Jaguars, I'm just thinking the sky's the limit. Maybe a con is that they're the Jaguars and they haven't performed in a long time, but I think this season it clicks. I think these are going to be the Bengals, how they've been the last two seasons. I think they make that jump, and I think they can make a deep run in the playoffs, potentially Super Bowl appearance. So last year they were 9-8. I projected a lot worse at 4-13. I'm sorry, Jacksonville, but this year I'm going a whopping 12-5 for you guys. I think you guys win the division. I think you guys are probably either the third, I would say maybe third seed, maybe the second, but I'll go third in the AFC. So we'll see where it goes from there. But I got high hopes for the Jaguars and their fantasy football output this season. Lastly, we got the Tennessee Titans, who finished second in the division with a 7-10 record. And besides the Jaguars, with this division, we're seeing a trend of losing seasons for the first time in a while. This was their first losing season since 2015. Now, in the offseason, they went out and got Sean Murphy-Bunting to a one-year deal. I thought that was really good. In the draft, they went offensive tackle Peter Skoronski out of Northwestern with the 11th overall pick. And then they went with Will Levis after taking a quarterback last year. I just couldn't believe that they would do that again this year, going with Levis, but he's not a terrible quarterback. He's going to have to compete with Malik Willis, and he's going to have to compete against right now the starter, Ryan Tannehill. Finished quarterback 25 last year in 12 games, 2,500 yards, 13 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions. Now, if he played all 17 games, he was on pace to finish QB 16. Now, although Tannehill is listed as a starter, you have Malik Willis, who they gave a chance last year and didn't really like. Now they have Will Levis. So what's going to happen? Are they going to give Willis another shot? Are they going to give Levis a shot? I don't know, but I'd stay away from Tannehill. I just think that it's just too risky right now. So he's going quarterback 29 for me, as on ESPN. Again, he could pop off and be a top 20 QB, but with everybody behind him and then possibly giving them a chance, I just don't see it happening. Now, the running back is the stud Derrick Henry, finished running back 4 last year, over 1,500 yards, which was second best amongst running backs, and 13 touchdowns, which was tied for second most. What hurts Henry is always PPR, in which he never really gets receptions, but last season he had his most career catches with 33. But out of the top 10 finishers, which he was, that was second worst behind Nick Chubb. So a non-PPR, he's a lot higher than PPR. But he's still a workhorse. No matter who's at quarterback, they're still going to feed him the ball. The offensive success revolves around Henry. So if he can stay healthy, I have him as my RB4, ESPN RB6. So I'm flopping him and Jonathan Taylor. I just think, Henry's just been the more consistent back, although Taylor does get a little bit more receptions. Their wide receiver, Treylon Burks, playing only 11 games last season, totaling 33 receptions, 444 yards, only 1 touchdown. This arguably is the worst wide receiver core in the NFL, and for the way they pass the ball, it doesn't make it help anymore. It actually helps Derrick Henry's numbers, in my opinion. Nick Westbrook and Kyle Phillips are the other wide receivers. I'd stay away from any of these guys. I have Burks as wide receiver 39. He's going 49 on ESPN, or I'm sorry, 49 for me, 39 for ESPN. I'm a lot worse on him than ESPN is. Now, a guy that I really like is Okonkwo for Tennessee. He finished tight end 25 last year with 32 receptions, 450 yards, and 3 touchdowns in only 8 games as a starter in his rookie season. He did play every game, but this was as a starter. He had 2 of 3 touchdowns when starting, which is a very good sign. Now, in my opinion, I think he has so much upside. ESPN sees that as well. They have him as tight end 19. I have him as tight end 17, but I think he could be a huge sleeper at that spot. I think that he could, he might not even get drafted until a very late round, but I think he could easily finish as, or I would say right around tight end 10 this season, even with the terrible passing game. We see how bad the wide receiver core is. Give Okonkwo a chance. I think he'll be a good bargain. Their defense is really bad, so I wouldn't draft them. But the pro is that they got Derrick Henry on the team. The cons, one of, if not the worst receiving cores in the league. They have a bad defense, and we don't know who their quarterback is. So with that being said, last year they went 7-10. I projected 11-6. I think they go down and they get to 5-12 this season, which I think they could even be worse than that. So something new this year is at the end of the divisional previews of the videos, I'm going to give my best team, my sleeper team, and my busts. So I think the best overall team, if we had to draft an all AFC South team, would be Trevor Lawrence at QB, Derrick Henry at running back, Michael Pittman Jr. at wide receiver, and at tight end, Eric Ingram. My sleepers out of the AFC South would be CJ Stroud from Houston at quarterback, running back Travis Etienne, who I think can finish in the top 5 potentially. Wide receiver Calvin Ridley, who again was a top guy just 2 years ago. I think he could get back to that with arguably a better quarterback in Trevor Lawrence. And finally, the guy I just talked about, tight end Okonkwo from Tennessee. And my busts are going to be quarterback Anthony Richardson. He's just being drafted way too high right now in ESPN leagues. We don't even know who's going to be starting, and he wasn't as good as some of these other quarterbacks in college. Running back Damian Pierce, I think that, again, we discussed Devin Singletary taking away some time from him, which I think ultimately hurts his stats. Wide receiver Treylon Burks of Tennessee. I just don't think they're going to be passing the ball a lot, and if so, there's other options. Finally, tight end Jelani Woods. ESPN's pretty high on him, but Indianapolis likes to use multiple tight ends, and I think that hurts his numbers. So if we take a look at the projections, once again, I have the Jaguars at 12-5, the Colts at 6-11, the Titans at 5-12, and the Texans at 4-13. So not a very good division, an easy division, an easy way for the Jaguars to get more wins this season. That's what I got for you tonight, folks. That is the AFC South divisional preview. Make sure to follow me, Sports Talk Podcast, on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and Twitter. I'll be making videos every week starting now until the end of the NFL season. Right now, we're going to be breaking down the divisions. Then we'll get to my rankings, sleepers, and busts before the start of the season. So that way you can draft knowing what you want to get, knowing what you should go after, and who to stay away from. And throughout the season, we'll be doing weekly picks, weekly sports betting picks. So if you're into all of that, make sure you're hitting that follow button and sharing with your friends. But other than that, hope you enjoyed this one. I hope you enjoy your week. And I'll talk to you guys next week. We will be bringing you the AFC East next week. So get ready for that one.